After my father died in a car crash, I, Saffron Miller, became an orphan. His close friend, a man decades his senior and a respected, almost ascetic figure in the capital's elite circles, adopted me. He told me he was 10 years older than me and that I should call him Uncle Ethan. From then on, if I wanted the stars, he would pluck them from the sky. If I wanted the moon, he would capture it for me. He spoiled me until I became the most pampered little princess in South City. That was until my 18th birthday. I stole his prayer beads and one by one placed them into the most intimate part of myself. The cool touch felt like his caress. The next second, the door opened. He saw everything. Disbelieving and enraged, he rebuked me for defying all morality, for daring to harbor such fantasies about my own uncle. The next day, he tore up my acceptance letter to Stanford and sent me to the Charity Virtue Institute. It was the most famous institution in the North Capital area for learning propriety and shame. He told me to stay there, learn my lesson, and purge myself of those thoughts before returning. But on my first day there, they poured mustard into my eyes. On the second day, I was dragged by my hair down the stairs for 2 hours. On the third day, 10 men entered my room. 3 years later, Ethan Payne came to pick me up. Saffron stood at the entrance of the Charity Virtue Institute, watching the familiar black Maybach pull to a stop. The door opened, and Ethan stepped out from the driver's seat, looking as cold and noble as ever. The only difference from 3 years ago was the woman in his passenger seat. She wore an elegant white dress, her long hair draped over her shoulders, a gentle smile on her face. "You must be Nia, right?" "Hello, I'm Ethan's fiancée, Miranda Vance. You can just call me Miranda." Saffron nodded numbly, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello, Miranda." After speaking, she turned and got into the back seat of the car. Ethan sat in the driver's seat, his face cold as he started the car. "So, what have you learned these past few years? Do you still have those thoughts?" Saffron's fingers trembled slightly, a vice gripping her heart. She remembered the years of electric shocks, of being dragged, of being violated. A stone seemed lodged in her throat, the pain making it almost impossible to speak. She squeezed her eyes shut, her voice a faint whisper. "No, never again." Ethan's brow furrowed, a strange emotion stirring within him. This was the answer he had wanted to hear, so why did he feel so uneasy? "It's good that you know." Saffron smiled bitterly, lowered her head, and said no more. The car sped along, finally stopping in front of the Payne family's villa. Saffron got out of the car and habitually walked toward her room. However, when she pushed the door open, she found it had been converted into a shelter for cats. Miranda stood behind her, a hint of apology on her face. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Nia. Since your Uncle Ethan and I are getting married soon, I moved in a while ago. I have a habit of rescuing stray cats and dogs, and your room gets the best sunlight, so I put the cats in here. I'll have the housekeeper clear it out right now." Saffron shook her head. "There's no need, Miranda. You're the mistress of this house. It doesn't matter where I stay." She then turned and went to a guest room, her compliance unsettling. At dinner, Ethan was incredibly attentive to Miranda. He served her food, spoke to her in soft whispers, his eyes filled with tenderness. Saffron kept her eyes down the entire time, staring at the food in her bowl as if none of it had anything to do with her. Miranda glanced at her and said softly, "Nia, don't just eat your rice. Have some vegetables." As if on command, Saffron mechanically began stuffing vegetables into her mouth, swallowing them numbly even as they burned her throat and raised blisters. Miranda smiled at Ethan. "And you said Nia would be difficult to get along with. Look at her now, she's so well behaved." Ethan looked up at Saffron. He hadn't expected her to change so completely. She hadn't thrown a single tantrum since she'd been back. He nodded with satisfaction. "It seems you learned your lessons well there. From now on, just be like you were today and get along with Miranda." Saffron, having finished the plate of vegetables in front of her, stood up. "I'm full. I'm going back to my room." She returned to her room and closed the door, finally letting out a breath of relief. She took out a small box from her pocket, which contained the money she had saved during her years at the Institute. She remembered what Ethan had said, get along with Miranda, but she had already made up her mind. She would buy a plane ticket and leave this place, leave Ethan Payne forever. She counted the money and found it was just enough for a budget flight leaving in 9 days. She took out her phone and with trembling fingers clicked purchase. The moment the ticket was confirmed, she closed her eyes as a tear slowly trickled down her face, a tear of release and of despair. After washing up, she lay in bed and forced her eyes shut, just as she had done every night at the Institute. But perhaps because she was back in a familiar place, as soon as she closed her eyes, Ethan's face appeared in her mind. On that day, his eyes had been ice cold, his voice deep and distant. "Saffron, you defy all morality. How could you be so depraved as to harbor fantasies about your own uncle?" The past swirled in her mind. Just as she was drifting off to sleep, the door suddenly opened. Someone walked in, frowning. "Why are you sleeping so early? You forgot to drink your milk." Hearing the man's voice, Saffron's eyes shot open. She sat up in a conditioned reflex. She had forgotten she was home. She thought she was still at the Charity Virtue Institute. There, whenever a man entered her room, she had to immediately unbuckle his belt and service him. Even during her period, she had to kneel and consume their filth, saying, "Thank you for your gift." Any hesitation, any delay in the process, meant a fate worse than death. So she scrambled forward, fell to her knees, and began to unbuckle the man's belt, crying, "Don't hit me, please don't hit me, I'll serve you right now." Just as the belt was about to come undone, the lights flickered on. Through her tear-blurred eyes, she saw Ethan standing before her, holding a glass of milk, his face a mask of utter disbelief and shock. "Saffron, what in God's name are you doing?" Chapter 2. Saffron's pale lips trembled, but before she could speak, Ethan exploded in fury. He slammed the glass of milk onto the floor. It shattered, spraying glass and cold, white liquid near her feet. "I thought you had learned your lesson. I see this was your next move." His voice was like ice, his eyes filled with disgust and rage. "Let me tell you something. I am not interested in little girls, and certainly not one I raised myself. I am not a beast. You could stand naked in front of me, and I wouldn't even look at you." He turned and strode away, his back as rigid and cold as a mountain of ice. Saffron stood frozen, her fingers twisting the hem of her clothes until her knuckles turned white. Her throat was tight, and she couldn't make a sound. Soon, a series of suggestive noises came from the room next door. "Ethan, be gentle, Nia is right next door." Ethan didn't reply, but the wet, clinging sound of kisses grew louder. It was followed by Miranda's moans, each one higher and more piercing than the last. The rhythmic creaking of the bed grew more and more intense. Saffron knew Ethan was doing this to warn her, to make her understand her place. It was painful, yes, but the pain wasn't because she loved him. In those 3 hellish years, any love she'd had for him had been burned to ash. When he sent her to the Charity Virtue Institute, Ethan had said, "Remember this, Saffron, I will never love you." 3 years later, she had learned her place. She no longer dared to love him. Her pain stemmed from the fact that she had been forced to listen to sounds like these every night for 3 years. Sometimes they belonged to others. Sometimes they belonged to her. The sounds clung to her like a nightmare from which she couldn't escape. She fell to her knees on the floor of her room, facing the direction of the Institute, and began to bang her head on the ground again and again. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was dull and jarring. Saffron doesn't love Ethan Payne anymore. Saffron doesn't love Ethan Payne anymore. Saffron will never, ever love Ethan Payne again. She chanted the words like a madwoman, her voice hoarse and numb, as if this was the only way to free herself from the torment of her memories. The next morning, Saffron sat at the dining table, mechanically eating her breakfast with her head down. Ethan and Miranda came downstairs, Miranda's neck covered in love bites, her smile bright and blinding. Saffron didn't look up, as if it had nothing to do with her. After finishing her breakfast, she stood up to leave but was stopped by Ethan. "Stop, what happened to your forehead?" Saffron paused, her voice numb. "I bumped it by accident." She turned to leave. She had a plan. Hide in her room for the next 8 days, and then disappear for good. Ethan's voice rose sharply. "What kind of accident could do that to your head? Are you trying another one of your tricks?" Before he could finish, Miranda interrupted him. "Ethan, don't be so harsh on a young girl." She smiled at Saffron. "Nia, Ethan and I are going to look at wedding venues today. Why don't you come with us?" Saffron was about to refuse when Ethan snapped, "I just told you yesterday to get along with Miranda. Have you already forgotten?" Saffron lowered her head, her voice faint. "Fine." After looking at several venues, Miranda decided on a cruise ship for the wedding. Partway through, Ethan took a business call and went inside the cabin. Miranda and Saffron stood on the deck, the salty sea breeze washing over them. They stood in silence. Saffron, unused to being around people for so long, was about to quietly slip away when Miranda suddenly called out to her. "Nia, I've always been curious. What kind of shameless hussy falls in love with her own uncle?" Saffron's body went rigid, her fingers gripping the railing tightly. Miranda saw her shock and let out a light laugh. "Curious how I know. I'd heard that Ethan had a little girl he spoiled rotten, but then he suddenly sent her off to learn about virtue. I was intrigued, so I did some digging. That's when I found out about your disgusting little fantasy, falling for the very man who raised you." Saffron's face was ashen, her lips trembling. Before she could finish her sentence, Miranda turned, her eyes cold and sharp. "Saffron, I have loved Ethan for many years. He's finally agreed to marry me, and I will not allow anything to go wrong. I especially don't want a third wheel meddling in our lives after we're married. Do you understand?" Saffron closed her eyes, her voice trembling. "I understand, Miranda. Don't worry, I'll leave." Chapter 3, "Don't worry," Miranda scoffed. "I don't trust you one bit, so before the wedding, I'm going to force you to leave myself." Before Saffron could react, Miranda spun around and threw herself into the sea. The splash instantly drew everyone's attention. "Miranda," Ethan's voice came from the cabin. He rushed out and, without a moment's hesitation, dove into the water. Saffron stood rooted to the spot, her limbs ice cold. Ethan managed to pull Miranda back onto the deck and began performing CPR. Miranda coughed several times, her eyes fluttering open weakly. They were misty and filled with a pitiful vulnerability. "Ethan, I thought Nia was starting to accept me these past few days. I never thought she would push me into the sea when I wasn't looking. Don't blame her, she just..." Before she could finish, she fainted. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes burning with suppressed fury. "Incorrigible Saffron, what will it take for you to abandon those filthy thoughts of yours?" Saffron shook her head frantically. "It wasn't like that. Uncle Ethan, I really don't love you anymore. I didn't push her. Is there a single truthful word that comes out of your mouth?" "Just you wait." Ethan refused to listen anymore. He swept Miranda into his arms and quickly left the deck, rushing her to the hospital. Saffron stood alone, her heart feeling as if it had been brutally carved out of her chest. Watching his retreating back, she murmured the words she had repeated to herself thousands of times. "Ethan Payne, I really, truly don't love you anymore." That night, Saffron sat alone on the sofa, waiting. She knew what his "just you wait" meant. He was coming to punish her. In her years at the Charity Virtue Institute, she had learned that running or begging for mercy only made the pain worse. So she waited obediently for her punishment. She didn't know how long she waited before the front door was thrown open. Ethan stormed in, bringing the fury of the storm with him. "Kneel," Saffron complied, kneeling on the floor with her head bowed, silent. Ethan froze for a second, seemingly surprised by her obedience. He pulled a whip from the wall and walked toward her, step by step. "So you know how to obey now? It's too late, Saffron. Have I spoiled you so much that you've become lawless? Did you think this whip was just for decoration?" With a sharp crack, the whip lashed across her back. Saffron's body shuddered as if from an electric shock, but she didn't make a sound, as if the whip had struck someone else. "Speak," Ethan's voice rose, thick with rage. "Do you or do you not admit you were wrong?" "I was wrong." "You were wrong?" Ethan sneered, raising the whip again. "If you were wrong, then why did you do it?" Crack, crack, crack. Ethan's voice was choked with fury as the whip fell again and again on Saffron's back. The first lash. "Why did you push Miranda into the sea? Do you have any idea she almost died?" The second lash. "Why did you have to love me? Don't you know I'm 10 years older than you?" The third lash. "Why are you so shameless? Don't you know I raised you?" The 52nd lash. "Saffron, why did you have to be so depraved that you made me?" His mind consumed by rage, Ethan lost count of the lashes. The words were about to spill from his lips when the housekeeper, Martha, threw herself forward, sobbing. "Sir, stop please, stop hitting her. Miss Saffron has been pampered her whole life. She can't take this. Please, just look, there's so much blood." Only then did Ethan stop, looking down at Saffron. Her back was a river of red. A pool of blood had formed on the floor, some of it even seeping under the toe of his leather shoe. But what shocked him was that Saffron had kept her head down the entire time. She hadn't shed a single tear or begged for mercy. He yanked her to her feet, only to find her eyes were empty and numb. "Saffron, can't you feel pain? Weren't you always the first to cry and complain that it hurt?" Saffron looked up, her voice calm. "Because it doesn't hurt." The pain she had endured at the institute, the beatings she had taken, were far worse than this. Her voice was hoarse, her face pale. "Are you finished? If you're finished, can I go now, Uncle Ethan?" Ethan finally realized something was wrong. How could it not hurt? After so many lashes, how could it possibly not hurt? He pulled at her clothes. The housekeeper behind him gasped, and his own pupils contracted, his breath catching in his throat. Chapter 4, Saffron's back was a horrifying tapestry of wounds. Beneath the fresh whip marks lay a crisscrossing network of old scars, as if countless acts of torture had been carved into her skin. There wasn't a single patch of smooth skin left on her body. Every inch seemed to scream of the agony she had endured. Ethan stood before her, the whip slipping from his grasp and clattering to the floor. His face turned deathly pale, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. His fingers trembled, reaching for her back but pulling away before they could touch the wounds, as if afraid of causing her more pain. How did this happen?" he asked, his voice hoarse with a mixture of repressed fury and heartbreak. Saffron lowered her head, a bitter smile touching her lips. "So, he's finally noticed? Finally realized that the so-called Charity Virtue Institute was actually a living hell. But what difference did it make now? Could the bright, smiling little princess Saffron once was ever come back? No, she was gone forever." Just as she was about to speak, Miranda's voice drifted in from behind her, gentle yet laced with a weary sigh. "Nia, I've already forgiven you for pushing me into the sea. Why are you still using these tricks to deceive Ethan?" Ethan's expression changed instantly, a flicker of uncertainty in his voice. "These are fake," Miranda laughed lightly, her tone dismissive. "Of course they are. Didn't you say Nia has been at the Charity Virtue Institute for the past 3 years? That's the most reputable school in the North Capital. She's been in a closed campus. Where could she possibly get hurt? Ethan, don't let her fool you." A wave of relief washed over Ethan, but it was immediately replaced by a surge of boundless anger. He violently threw the whip to the ground, his voice like ice. "Saffron, you truly are incorrigible. You will not eat for a day." Saffron simply nodded, her face devoid of any expression. At the institute, going without food was a regular occurrence. Sometimes, when the hunger became unbearable, she even had to fight with the dogs for scraps. She said softly, "Fine." Then she turned and walked back to her room, her silhouette thin and defiant. In her room, Martha Jones, the housekeeper who had cared for her for years, came in holding a tube of ointment. When she saw the wounds on Saffron's back, tears instantly welled in her eyes. "Miss, why don't you explain? How could these scars be fake? You were supposed to be at a school. How did you get hurt like this? Why don't you tell the master? He dotes on you so much. If he knew, it would break his heart." Saffron's eyes were downcast and empty. Martha's words were like a knife, twisting in her heart. Would he be heartbroken? Maybe the old Ethan would have been. He used to dote on her so much. Once, a boy gave her a love letter, saying that if she dated him, he'd take her for a ride in his sports car. When Ethan found out, he had a whole garage of luxury cars worth millions delivered for her to smash for fun, his voice laced with indulgence. "The little girl I raised can't be bought off by any common man." When she had a fever, he abandoned an important meeting overseas and flew for over 10 hours just to be by her bedside, staying up all night until her fever broke. When she had menstrual cramps, he would personally brew her brown sugar tea, feeding it to her while coaxing her softly, "Be a good girl, Nia. It won't hurt after you drink this." Tears started to form in the corners of Saffron's eyes. She closed them gently and whispered, "Martha, I'm tired. I want to sleep." Martha wiped her tears, gently covered her with a blanket, and said in a choked voice, "All right, miss, you get some rest." Saffron nodded and lay down, the tears finally escaping, soaking her pillow. As her thoughts drifted, she fell asleep. In her dreams, she was back in the past. Ethan held her hand, taking her to an amusement park, buying her ice cream and riding the carousel with her. His smile was gentle and doting, as if she was his entire world. But that was all so far away now. It was all in the past. Chapter 5, Saffron spent a day in her room, recuperating. The whip marks on her back still burned with a searing pain, but she was long accustomed to this kind of agony. Just then, the door was pushed open gently. Miranda walked in, holding an exquisite gown. "Nia, it's Ethan's birthday today. I've thrown a party for him, you should come with me." Saffron shook her head. "I'm not going, you two go ahead." Miranda's smile stiffened slightly, her tone carrying a veiled threat. "Nia, you had better be a good girl and listen." At those words, Saffron's body jolted, her eyes instantly becoming vacant. As if controlled by some invisible force, she nodded mechanically, reached for the dress, and turned to change. Miranda watched her retreating back, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. She had discovered early on that if she told Saffron, "You had better be a good girl and listen," Saffron would obey without resistance, as if under a spell. She wondered if this was a habit formed at the Charity Virtue Institute. But that school was supposed to teach virtue. Why would they use such methods? Before she could think it through, Saffron emerged, having changed into the gown. Miranda looked her up and down, nodding in satisfaction. "Let's go. The party is about to start." The banquet hall was dazzling, filled with guests. Saffron followed behind Miranda, her head bowed, like a lifeless puppet. Her appearance immediately sparked whispers among the crowd. "Is that the little girl, mister? Payne raised with such care? Why does she look so skeletal and soulless?" "I know, right? My son used to have a crush on her. He said she was the brightest girl, that every boy in school adored her. What happened? She looks like a doll. Compared to his fiancée, she just pales in comparison. Miss Vance and Mr. Payne are the perfect match, a true power couple." Saffron paid no mind to the gossip, silently trailing behind Miranda. Miranda, meanwhile, smiled as she walked to Ethan's side, linking her arm with his. "Ethan, darling, so many people are saying we're a perfect match." Ethan smiled faintly, his voice gentle. "They're only speaking the truth." When it was time for gifts, Miranda presented an elegant box, her voice tinged with a shy blush. "You have everything you could ever want, so this year my gift is a family planning chart. We're getting married soon, and I was thinking we could have a son and a daughter. What do you think?" Ethan froze for a moment, his gaze involuntarily flicking toward Saffron, who stood silently to the side. He quickly looked away and said indulgently, "Whatever you say. I'll listen to you." Miranda snuggled sweetly into his arms, then turned to Saffron. "Nia, what gift did you get?" Saffron lowered her eyes, took a gift box from her bag, and handed it to Ethan. He opened it to find a translucent jade bracelet. Miranda glanced at it and said dismissively, "Oh, a jade bracelet. Why would Ethan wear a bracelet? That's not a very thoughtful gift." Saffron didn't speak, but she raised her eyes to meet Ethan's. As expected, she saw the shock in his eyes. Only the two of them knew that this jade bracelet was a Payne family heirloom, meant for the future matriarch of the family. Years ago, Saffron had begged and wheedled until she got it from him. Ethan, thinking it was just a childish fancy for a pretty trinket, had indulged her and given it to her. And now, she was returning it of her own accord. Saffron said softly, "Uncle Ethan, I wish you happiness." Ethan's heart gave a sudden, violent lurch. Just as he was about to speak, a scream cut through the room. He looked up and saw that the grand chandelier in the center of the hall was swaying precariously. It was about to fall directly on top of where Saffron was standing. Chapter 6, Nia, look out, Ethan's pupils constricted. In the split second before it fell, he lunged forward without hesitation, shielding Saffron with his own body. The chandelier crashed heavily onto his shoulder with a sickening thud. Glass shattered, and the scene descended into chaos as guests screamed and scattered. Miranda ran over, crying, her voice trembling. "Ethan, how badly are you hurt? Does it hurt? We have to go to the hospital." Ethan looked at the trembling Saffron in his arms, forcing his voice to remain steady. "It's nothing, a minor injury." But Miranda insisted, "No, we must go to the hospital." Ethan relented and had his assistant drive him. At the same time, he instructed Miranda, take Nia home, she'll be scared on her own." Miranda's face soured. "How can you still be thinking about her at a time like this?" "Just do it," Ethan said, his face pale with pain. "After all, I raised her." Miranda bit her lip, and with an ill-tempered sigh, grabbed Saffron's wrist and pulled her into a car. Saffron's mind was a blur. She could only follow Miranda mechanically. Halfway there, Miranda suddenly told the driver to stop. She looked at Saffron, her teeth clenched. "I have something to take care of. I'm not going home. You can walk back from here." The driver couldn't help but protest. "Miss Vance, it's very cold outside." Miranda cut him off sharply. "Who is going to be the mistress of the Payne family? Have you forgotten who you take orders from?" The driver said no more, only watching helplessly as Saffron got out of the car and disappeared into the vast darkness. Saffron walked for 5 solid hours before she finally reached the Payne villa. Along the way, she had stumbled into a ditch in the dark, and by the time she arrived, her clothes were soaked through and her hair was plastered to her face. She was a complete wreck. However, before she could even catch her breath, she saw that the entire villa was engulfed in flames, the fire lighting up the night sky. She stood stunned, and before she could process what was happening, several bodyguards rushed over and seized her by the wrist. "Miss, you set a fire that caused Miss Vance to suffer third-degree burns. She's in the hospital fighting for her life. Mr. Payne wants us to bring you to him." Saffron stared blankly, shaking her head in confusion. "I didn't." The bodyguards ignored her protests, forcing her into a car and driving her to the hospital. At the hospital, Ethan stood in the hallway, his left shoulder bandaged. He held his black suit jacket in his left hand, leaning against the wall, his face a dark and terrible mask. As the bodyguards brought Saffron in, he looked up, his voice seething with suppressed rage. "Saffron, can you not go one day without causing trouble? What did Miranda ever do to you that you would burn her like this?" Saffron shook her head frantically. "It wasn't me, I didn't." Ethan cut her off, his voice ice cold. "Enough, the evidence is clear. If it wasn't you, are you suggesting Miranda set herself on fire just to frame you?" She tried to explain again, but at that moment, the doors to the operating room burst open. A doctor rushed out, his tone grave. "Mr. Payne, Miss Vance's injuries are severe. Her only option is a skin graft. Before she lost consciousness, she left a message for you. She said you spoil Miss Saffron too much and that it has to stop. For the injuries she has suffered this time, she said Miss Saffron must be the one to pay her back." The meaning was chillingly clear. Miranda wanted Saffron's skin. Chapter 7, Ethan's body went rigid. His gaze fell upon Saffron, his eyes a storm of hesitation and conflict. His fingers trembled slightly, his heart squeezed by an invisible hand, the pain making it hard to breathe. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the words died on his lips. The doctor, seeing his indecision, pressed him. "Mr. Payne, Miss Vance has already passed out from the pain. Every second we delay surgery increases the chance of permanent scarring. You need to decide quickly." Ethan's face turned deathly pale, as if he'd been cornered. He took a deep breath, seemingly steeling himself, and finally said in a low voice, "Saffron, I taught you from a young age that when you do something wrong, there are consequences." Hearing those words, Saffron's heart shattered. She moved her lips, trying to say something, but nothing came out. She suddenly realized that she wanted to cry, but not a single tear would fall. Perhaps they had all dried up at the Charity Virtue Institute. Expressionless, she was wheeled into the operating room like a soulless shell. The moment the door closed, Miranda, who was supposed to have passed out from the pain, suddenly sat up on the gurney. A triumphant smile played on her lips. There was not a single burn mark on her. She looked at the doctor, her voice laced with a chilling coldness. "Begin, and remember, no anesthesia. I want you to carve the skin off her, piece by piece." The doctors and nurses exchanged uneasy glances, but dared not disobey. Several nurses moved forward, pinning Saffron's arms and legs, securing her tightly to the operating table. Saffron didn't struggle. She lay there silently, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The moment the scalpel touched her skin, a searing pain shot through her entire body. Her body instinctively flinched, but she clenched her jaw and didn't make a sound. The blade moved, inch by inch, slicing through her skin. Blood flowed from the wound, staining the operating table red. Her fingers gripped the edge of the gurney so tightly her knuckles turned white, her nails digging into her own flesh, but still, she remained silent. Miranda stood to the side, watching with rapt attention, her eyes filled with mockery and satisfaction. She chuckled softly. "Saffron, you really are a monster. Even after all this, you can stay completely silent." Saffron didn't respond, only gritting her teeth against the agony of each cut. The scalpel continued its work, carving away piece after piece of her skin. Saffron's consciousness began to fade, her vision darkening. The last thing she was aware of were the cold, rhythmic beeping of the machines and Miranda's triumphant laughter. "When you're done, throw her out for the dogs to eat." Saffron's consciousness finally gave way, and the world went black. When she woke up, she was in a hospital bed, a large bandage wrapped around her arm. The slightest touch sent a wave of pain through her. The room was deathly quiet, punctuated only by the beeping of machines and the occasional whispers of nurses. Mr. Payne is so good to Miss Vance. He's here with her every day, even feeding her himself. I know, right? I heard they're getting married tomorrow. They're such a perfect couple. That Saffron girl, I heard she's the one Mr. Payne used to raise. He spoiled her to no end. Why is he ignoring her now? It's so sad. Saffron said nothing. She listened silently, counting down the days until she could leave. Chapter 8. On the day of her discharge, Ethan came to pick her and Miranda up. Miranda linked her arm with Saffron's, her voice dripping with false sincerity. Nia, tomorrow is my wedding to your Uncle Ethan. I know setting that fire was an impulsive thing for you to do, but I don't want to hold it against you. Let's just put the past behind us, okay? Saffron remained silent, her head bowed, her eyes empty. Ethan frowned, his voice sharp with displeasure. Didn't you hear her talking to you? Saffron still said nothing, as if she had lost the strength to respond. A heavy tension filled the car, the atmosphere suffocating. Halfway to their destination, the hotel manager called. Mr. Payne, there's a small issue with the wedding venue setup. Would you be able to come and take a look? Fearing Saffron might cause trouble at the wedding, like pushing Miranda into the sea again, they had changed the venue to a hotel. Ethan scowled and turned the car toward the hotel. When they arrived, Ethan got out and asked the staff, "What's the problem?" A staff member replied respectfully, "This way, Mr. Payne, I'll show you." Ethan nodded and turned to Miranda and Saffron. "You two go up to the room and rest. I'll be there as soon as I'm done." Miranda smiled and nodded, pulling Saffron into a hotel room. Inside, Miranda sat on the sofa, her tone mocking. "Saffron, I have to admire you. We're getting married tomorrow and you're still not leaving," Saffron said. "I will leave." Miranda sneered, her voice full of contempt. "You'll leave? You think I'll believe that? If you were going to leave, you would have been gone by now. The only reason you're still here is because you're still pathetically hoping Ethan might love you. Let me tell you, it's impossible. Ethan is my fiancé now. The person he loves is me to him. You are nothing but an unwanted burden. Since you refuse to do this the easy way, don't blame me for being forceful." As she finished speaking, she clapped her hands. The door opened, and a group of vagrants swarmed into the room. In the same instant, Miranda tore a large rip in her own dress, messed up her hair, and threw open the door, screaming, "Help Ethan, help me!" Ethan, having just finished his business, was on his way to find them. Hearing the scream, he burst into the room. Miranda, looking tearful and terrified, threw herself into his arms. "Ethan, Saffron hired a group of vagrants to assault me. She hates me, she wanted to destroy me." Ethan looked at Saffron in disbelief, a fire of rage igniting in his eyes, threatening to consume the entire room. "Saffron, you are truly beyond saving." Saffron opened her mouth to explain, but Ethan wouldn't listen. He said coldly, "Since you seem to enjoy the feeling of being violated so much, why don't you stay here and enjoy it for a night?" With that, he scooped Miranda into his arms, turned, and left without giving Saffron a single glance. Saffron's pupils contracted, the blood in her veins turning to ice. Memories of her years at the Charity Virtue Institute flooded her mind: the dark confinement room, the cold whips, the leering faces of the men. Her body began to tremble uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. "Uncle Ethan, save me please, I'm begging you, don't leave me here." Saffron lunged forward, trying to grab the hem of Ethan's coat, but he coldly shook her off. She fell to her knees, banging her head on the floor, the dull thuds echoing in the room. I was really wrong, please. Don't leave me here, Uncle Ethan, save me." "I can't be alone with these men, I'll go insane. I'll really go insane." She screamed in agony and despair, tears mixing with the blood trickling from her forehead, staining the floor red. This was the first time since he had brought her back from the institute that he had seen her so completely broken. Ethan's steps faltered for a fraction of a second, but in the end, he did not turn back. Chapter 9, nestled in his arms, Miranda whispered, "Will anything really happen?" Ethan sneered. "She hired them herself. What could possibly happen?" He paused, listening for a moment. Hearing no screams from the room, he continued on, satisfied. But he didn't know that the reason Saffron had stopped screaming was because the vagrants had already descended upon her. She had been well trained. During her years at the Institute, no matter how many men were on top of her, she was forbidden to scream. Doing so would only earn her a more brutal beating. The vagrants' hands coiled around her like snakes, tearing at her clothes, trampling her dignity. Saffron's body was like a broken doll, played with and discarded at their whim. Her fingers dug into the bedsheets until her knuckles were white, but she didn't make a single sound. Ethan's words echoed in her mind. She hired them herself. What could possibly happen? Her heart felt as if it were being crushed, the pain so intense she could hardly breathe. That night, Saffron was violated for hours on end. Her body felt as if it had been torn apart, her blood staining the sheets. She stared blankly at the ceiling, her eyes empty, as countless filthy men used her. The next morning, the vagrants finally pulled up their pants and left the room, satisfied. Saffron lay curled on the floor, covered in injuries, like a discarded rag doll. She didn't know how much time had passed before she numbly stood up and staggered out of the room. The moment she stepped into the hallway, she heard gasps of shock and horror. What happened to her? Why isn't she wearing any clothes? Oh my God, what happened? Her intestines are spilling out. Saffron walked forward numbly, as if the world around her didn't exist. Just then, her phone buzzed with a flight reminder, urging her to check in soon. Today was the day she had planned to fly away and start over. She was so close. So close. She had wanted to live so badly. Even in those years at the Institute, she had never given up hope. But now, her body and soul were utterly destroyed. She stared at the message, and the tears finally came. She couldn't leave. She could never leave now. The man she had loved most, Ethan Payne, had personally pushed her into hell. Again and again. Just then, his call came through. The moment she answered, he began to berate her. Have you lost your mind? Staying out all night, you're really getting into this act, aren't you? You hired those men, what could they possibly do to you? Saffron looked down at the wounds on her body, a desolate wasteland in her heart. What could they do to her? Just when she was about to start a new life, a group of men had violated her for an entire night. The painful images, layered over her memories from the Institute, would be seared into her mind for the rest of her life. They had utterly destroyed her. Ethan continued, You've had your fun. Today is my wedding with Miranda. You will be there on time and don't try any more tricks. I've told you, it's impossible between us. When you see this wedding with your own eyes, you'll finally give up. Saffron finally spoke, her voice hoarse but calm. Fine, Uncle Ethan, I'll let you see me with your own eyes. She hung up, pressed the elevator button, and went to the hotel rooftop. After hanging up, Ethan felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of unease. He was about to call her again when the wedding car pulled up to the hotel entrance. With a sickening crash, a body plummeted from above, smashing directly onto the hood of his car. Screams of terror erupted around him. He slowly looked up, and his pupils contracted violently through the shattered windshield. He saw Saffron's face. Covered in blood, her eyes wide open, refusing to grant him peace even in death. Chapter 10, Saffron's lifeless eyes were wide open, staring straight into Ethan's. His pupils shrank and he froze in disbelief. Nia. He whispered her name, and then the reality hit him. A searing pain, as if a hook were tearing at his heart, made his legs go weak. As he threw the car door open, a roar escaped his lips. Somebody help her, almost insane with grief. He scrambled to lift Saffron from the car. Ethan cradled her face, his hands trembling uncontrollably. The icy coldness of her skin sent a wave of panic through him. He screamed, "Get out of the way, everyone, move." As he looked down, he noticed for the first time that Saffron was naked, her body a canvas of wounds. But the most horrifying sight was her abdomen torn open, her intestines spilling out, slick with blood. The last shred of Ethan's sanity snapped. He clutched Saffron to his chest. Her cold, still body told him she was gone, but he refused to believe it. He held her with all his might and turned to get back in the car. She was so light in his arms. The thick, sticky blood dripped from his hands to the ground, deepening his terror. Hurry, his eyes were unfocused. He struggled to walk quickly, but each step felt like he was treading on cotton. Nia, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. He repeated the words over and over, but with her in his arms, he couldn't open the car door. His wolf-like eyes, now blood red, fixed on the trembling driver beside him. Open the door. The driver glanced at Saffron, clearly no longer breathing, and hesitated. Sir, she's already dead. The words were a bomb that ignited Ethan's rage. He roared, if you don't open this door, I'll kill you. A bystander opened the door for him and quickly stepped back. Ethan gently laid Saffron inside, then covered her with his own jacket before pulling her tightly into his arms again. He held her as if terrified she would vanish from his grasp. The driver, resigned, started the car, his eyes darting nervously to Ethan in the back seat. Ethan ignored everything, cradling Saffron, gently patting the back of her head and whispering reassurances. It'll be okay in a moment. Everything will be okay. Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. He was like a man who had lost his mind, repeating the same phrases, his eyes vacant, filled with a numb and profound agony. At that moment, a faint, colorless wisp of a soul drifted from Saffron's body, gathering like smoke. Saffron saw her own pale body in the car, and she saw Ethan, clearly on the verge of a mental breakdown, clutching her tightly. Nia. Watching this scene, Saffron felt nothing. Compared to the suffering she had endured, these tears meant nothing to her. She watched as Ethan carried her from the car into the hospital, watched him scream hysterically at everyone. Doctor, save her please, save her, but the doctor merely checked for a breath and shook his head grimly. She's gone, my condolences. Still, Ethan refused to accept it, grabbing the doctor's sleeve. Just try, why won't you even try? Seeing that Ethan's driver was keeping a safe distance and there was no one to restrain him, the doctor reluctantly nodded. As Saffron's body was wheeled away, Ethan seemed to come to his senses for a moment, only to collapse onto the floor. The blood on his hands brought back the memory of his last encounter with her. I was wrong, I was really wrong, please. Don't leave me here, Uncle Ethan. Save me. I can't be alone with these men. I'll go insane. I really will. Her agonized, desperate screams now felt like a hand squeezing his heart, suffocating him. Large, hot tears streamed down his face. Regret choked him, and he sobbed. Nia! Floating in the air, it was the first time Saffron had ever seen Ethan cry like this. But strangely, she felt nothing at all. Chapter 11. In less than 10 minutes, the light above the operating room went out. Ethan watched as the doctor pushed Saffron's body out, shook his head again, and delivered the final verdict. The last flicker of hope was extinguished. An icy chill seeped into Ethan's bones, rendering him speechless. When Miranda arrived at the hospital, she found him sitting on the floor, motionless and unresponsive. Ethan, she reached for him, but he seemed rooted to the spot. His eyes were terrifyingly empty, but the words that came from his mouth were filled with venom. I want an autopsy. He stood up, the bloodstains on his clothes making him look like a terrifying specter. Miranda, summoning her courage, grabbed his arm, her voice frantic. What about our wedding, Ethan? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me? Before she could finish, Ethan cut her off. It's canceled. With that, he didn't spare her another glance, shaking off her hand and striding away. Miranda stomped her foot in frustration, her face a mask of bitter resentment. Saffron watched it all, floating silently, following close behind Ethan. In the morgue, Ethan stroked Saffron's now ashen face again and again. It was my fault, Uncle. I failed to protect you. Tears fell onto the cold metal slab. He held Saffron's hand, reluctant to let go. He studied the scars on her exposed skin, the sight so painful he couldn't bear to look for long. He stood up, his voice firm. Please, perform the autopsy. The medical examiner approached, pulling on gloves and a mask. Seeing that Ethan had no intention of leaving, he said hesitantly, It's best if you don't stay here. But Ethan didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on Saffron. I'm staying right here. The examiners exchanged glances and said no more. Just as one was about to lift the white sheet, a female voice cut in. You can't. Ethan turned to see Miranda rushing toward them. Ethan, what's the point of doing this? Everything she suffered, wasn't it all her own fault? Her own fault. If all of this was because Saffron had fallen in love with him, then everything she had done was, in some way, because of him. Moreover, seeing the unconcealed panic in Miranda's eyes, a chill ran down Ethan's spine. Were all the things Miranda had told him true? Once the seed of doubt was planted, Ethan dared not think too deeply. Ethan, your priority right now isn't Saffron. Are you going to leave me to face all those guests alone? Have you forgotten that today is our wedding day? As she spoke, Miranda's eyes welled up, and tears streamed down her face, smudging her makeup and making her look pitiful. This seemed to sway Ethan. He glanced at Saffron's body on the slab and asked the examiner, "Will waiting until tomorrow for the autopsy have any effect?" "No." Hearing this, Ethan let out a sigh of relief, but the grim look on his face frightened Miranda. "Without my permission, no one is to set foot in here." His command brought a sliver of relief to Miranda as well. Saffron watched Ethan leave but didn't follow. She floated beside her own body, curled into a ball. Why, even after death, could she still see herself, still see these painful, disgusting people? She didn't understand. However, Ethan only gave a few brief instructions at the door before turning back. Seeing that he intended to return to the morgue, Miranda grabbed him in disbelief. Her grip was strong, her long nails digging into his arm, causing a sharp pain. "Ethan Payne, what do you take me for? Are you going to stay with that dead body all night?" Miranda's voice grew shrill as she lost control. Hearing the words, "dead body," Ethan looked at the woman before him in disbelief. The Miranda he knew had never been so unreasonable. He couldn't suppress the chill in his voice, his eyes filled with a warning. "Miranda, Saffron is not a dead body. What I do is my own business. Besides, we aren't married, yet it's not your place to control me." Miranda saw the fury in his eyes and understood everything. A bitter smile touched her lips. She advanced on him, her voice pressing. "You're not going to marry me, are you, Ethan Payne?" Ethan stared at her silently, his lips pressed into a thin line. He made his decision almost instantly. "I don't want to get married anymore." At his answer, hot tears rolled down Miranda's cheeks. The humiliation made her feel even more wretched. She grabbed his hand. "Ethan, I know you're upset. I'll wait for you." "I can wait. Please don't give up on me so quickly, okay?" She threw her arms around him, her tears soaking his shoulder. The warmth of her touch, for a fleeting moment, reminded him of Saffron. It had been so long since Saffron had hugged him like that. The thought made his body go stiff. He listlessly pushed Miranda away. "I want to be alone." Chapter 12, Saffron was just floating, curled in a corner as she had been before, not wanting to even look at herself. She felt neither joy nor sorrow, until she saw Ethan appear before her again. He looked utterly lost. As his eyes fell on Saffron's body, silent tears streamed down his face. So many memories came flooding back, each one making the reality before him impossible to accept. He had protected Saffron her whole life, but he was also the one who had personally pushed her into the abyss. Once, a boy gave her a love letter, saying he'd take her for a ride in his sports car if she dated him. When he found out, he had a garage full of million-dollar supercars delivered for her to smash for fun. When she had a fever, he abandoned an important meeting overseas and flew for over 10 hours to be by her side, staying up all night until it broke. When she had menstrual cramps, he would personally brew her brown sugar tea, feeding it to her while coaxing her softly. He held her hand, took her to an amusement park, bought her ice cream, rode the carousel with her. All these buried memories were now crashing down on him. He had always believed that Saffron's love for him was a mistake. It was only now, having lost her, that he realized he couldn't live without her either. He was a full 10 years older than her. As a child, she had been unbearably cute, always asking for a hug. Back then, her small, warm body had been a source of strength for him. When facing the complexities of his work, the memory of her was what allowed him to persevere. He had always told himself it wasn't love. But when he saw her return from the institute, a soulless shell, he had been consumed by an uncontrollable agitation every night. When he saw her, after all the lashes he had given her, not crying, not complaining, her back a horrifying map of old and new scars, he had been heartbroken, lost. Even now, holding Miranda, he had been thinking of Saffron. His Saffron, who used to cry at the slightest pain, who would throw tantrums and act spoiled. Not the still figure lying before him, who everyone now called a dead body. "Saffron, you must be so cold." He gently lifted her from the metal slab and cradled her in his arms. As the sheet slipped, revealing the whip marks and the bluish bruises on her body, he couldn't bear to look. He held her in his arms and lay down beside her on the slab. He carefully pulled the sheet back up, holding her close. "Saffron, don't be afraid. I won't leave you alone." As he spoke, a visible tremor ran through him. The temperature in the morgue was unbearable for a living person. "Nia, do you remember what I gave you for your 18th birthday?" curled in the corner. Even if Saffron could speak, she wouldn't have remembered. Her 18th birthday was the beginning of her dream and the beginning of her nightmare. Her hard-earned Stanford acceptance letter was torn to shreds. She was sent to that institute, the place that had brutalized her into this state. She couldn't remember anything else. The pain and numbness had long since replaced any sweet memories. I was going to give you all the properties in my name. It's not much, but I have a few places in almost every city. I thought, since you got into such a good school, you'd definitely want to travel. Even if you didn't like some of the houses, you could sell them and use the money for your travels. I wanted you to be happy for your entire life. Ethan gently stroked her hair, smoothing it out, his eyes filled with tenderness. He even leaned down and pressed a trembling kiss to her forehead. I was wrong. I thought if you just gave up, we could go back to how things were. But instead, I turned you into a Nia who couldn't feel pain, who couldn't act spoiled. Uncle was wrong. As he spoke, his gaze was fixed on her face, her eyes, her delicate nose, and her lips, which had lost their color and turned a pale gray. Without hesitation, he leaned in and kissed them. Saffron watched in disbelief as Ethan kissed her own corpse. What was even more unbelievable was that he held her cold, lifeless body and slept like that for the entire night. Chapter 13, Even the Most Tender Moments Must End. After a night spent holding Saffron's cold body, Ethan's lips were purple from the chill, his face deathly pale. He quickly washed up and then made a phone call. Throughout the night, Ethan had pieced together the origin of it all, the Charity Virtue Institute. He decided to investigate it himself. At the same time, he brought the medical examiner in. Looking at Saffron lying on the metal slab, he couldn't hide his pain. Please be as thorough as possible. Every scar, no matter how small, I need to know about it. The examiners nodded to each other. As Ethan stepped out into the warm sunlight, a lump formed in his throat. Nia, I will find out the truth. The pain you suffered, I will repay it 1,000 times over. As a spirit, Saffron followed Ethan into the car. She watched him open his contacts, find the head of the Charity Virtue Institute, and dial the number. She saw the name he had saved for her in his contacts. It was Princess Nia. She thought he would have changed it long ago. Ethan was silent the entire drive until he arrived at the institute. Seeing the familiar place, Saffron didn't dare to go any further, but she wanted to know what he was doing here. So she turned her back to the building and floated quietly, perching on his shoulder. Ethan, oblivious, strode into the institute. He looked around and immediately sensed that something was wrong. All the students here had sallow complexions and vacant eyes. When they saw someone, they would either press themselves against the wall or quickly hide. When he had personally brought Saffron here, he had only looked at the general environment and the teachers. He had never paid attention to the students. Ethan remembered what Saffron had been like when she returned. He couldn't even recall how many times he had whipped her. He only remembered that her back was covered in blood, that a pool of it had formed on the floor, some of it even seeping under his shoe. And through it all, she had kept her head down, not shedding a single tear, not begging for mercy. When he had yanked her up, her eyes had been empty and numb, just like all the students here. Ethan was now almost certain of the truth. So when he walked into the office and saw the headmaster's fawning smile, rage consumed him. He strode forward and slapped him across the face. What did you do to Saffron Miller? Speak, his roar seemed to shake the office. The headmaster's eyes darted around as he tried to feign ignorance. Mr. Payne, we didn't do anything. Ethan knew they wouldn't confess easily. He turned to the bodyguards he had brought with him. You two, stay here and watch him. The headmaster finally started to panic. He grabbed Ethan's arm, his eyes filled with terror. Wasn't it you who said you wanted to crush that girl's fantasies? We used some minor methods, but didn't you say at the time that it was acceptable? Why are you suddenly investigating now? What are we supposed to do, Mr. Payne? As Saffron heard the headmaster's voice, she began to tremble. A fierce wind suddenly gusted through the window, howling like a whale. It slammed the rattling window against the wall with a loud crash. The howling wind and Saffron's trembling spirit were in perfect sync. She looked at the window in disbelief, and gradually, the wind subsided. Ethan, startled by the sudden gust, collected himself. Didn't I tell you to just teach her a lesson until she gave up her ideas? I said not to let her suffer too much, that I would definitely be back to get her, didn't I? He had only remembered to say those words a full 5 days after he had sent her there. By the time you called, we had already taught her a lesson." The headmaster's voice trailed off into a whisper, but Ethan heard him. He couldn't wait any longer. He burst out of the room, determined to find the surveillance room. The headmaster, resigned, led the way, his head bowed, not daring to look at the man whose reason was now consumed by flames of rage. Ethan Payne was not someone you could afford to cross. Chapter 14. In the surveillance room, Ethan ordered the headmaster to bring in everyone who had ever had contact with Saffron. In less than half an hour, the small, stuffy room was packed with people. Ethan's eyelid twitched uncontrollably as his face grew darker. At this small institute, these people made up nearly half the staff. So all of them had contact with Saffron. The realization made him look at each person with an intense, blade-like scrutiny. Everyone who met his gaze flinched and quickly looked away. A small institute like this, and you're so lawless? Ethan's voice trembled with rage. He snatched a black baton from one of his bodyguards and slammed it on the table. The sound, along with a cloud of dust, instantly silenced the low murmurs in the room. "Find it!" Ethan's roar made the bodyguards and the surveillance technician tremble, and they quickened their pace. The technician's voice was shaky. "I've found it." Ethan took a deep breath before leaning down to look. On the screen was a series of fragmented and brutal clips. On Saffron's first day, staff members forcibly poured mustard into her eyes. She clawed at her eyes, screaming in pain, but was met only with laughter. She pounded on the door, but there was no response, the sound echoing in the empty hall. She was dragged down a flight of stairs, her body limp and lifeless like a mop, with no strength left to struggle. 10 men entered her room. At this point, Ethan could barely watch anymore. He never imagined that so many horrific things could have happened in just those first 3 days, all because of him. Find all of it. Every single video. The sound of her own screams was enough to make Saffron tremble, so she fled, drifting out the window, aimless and lost. She floated on the wind, her back to the institute, trying to breathe to calm herself. The electric shocks, the dragging, the violation, all that pain should be forgotten. Forget it. Saffron couldn't cry, couldn't shed a tear. She just wished Ethan would stop digging. So she screamed, trying to summon the same furious wind to stop this heartless man. And as she screamed, a commotion did arise. A gale roared to life, accompanied by thunder and lightning. A bolt struck the institute behind her with a deafening crash. Inside, the technician was too frightened to move. He looked at Ethan, who simply dragged the people who had appeared in the video from the crowd. His bodyguards held them down as Ethan swung the baton again and again, bringing it down on the restrained figures. The screams that pierced through the window were so loud they almost drowned out the thunder. Blood spattered onto Ethan's hands, but his eyes were red with fury, his resolve unshaken. Thinking of the pain Saffron had endured, he felt this was not enough. Not nearly enough. He kept hitting them, with all his strength, as if they weren't living people but cotton dolls to be torn apart. It wasn't until his hands were numb and he had lost all feeling, until the floor was slick with blood, that he finally stopped. He stared at the blood on his hands and thought of Saffron. And Saffron, hearing the screams from inside, felt numb and sad. "What's the point, Ethan? What are you trying to prove by doing this? It's all useless now, isn't it?" Chapter 15. Saffron watched as more bodyguards swarmed the institute, hearing the rising and falling screams and pleas for mercy from within. The institute, finally, was like a monster baring its fangs, revealing its crimes to the world. But Saffron only felt weary. Why wouldn't heaven even take her soul? Compared to these scenes, she would rather close her eyes for good and escape this place. A hell on earth. That was the only way to describe it. Ethan looked at the blood on the floor and walls and finally felt a wave of exhaustion. He dropped the baton and ordered his men to lock the surveillance room. He ignored the screams from within, holding the recordings of everything related to Saffron as he walked, step by step, toward the one room he wanted to approach, but now dreaded to enter. The place that had imprisoned Saffron's pain for 3 years, the place he had sent her to himself. Most of the scars on her body wouldn't be there if it weren't for him. The thought tormented him. His hand trembled as he pushed open the door. The small, dark room contained only a bed, a simple wooden table, and a bathroom. The window facing the door was sealed shut, letting in only a sliver of light. The air was thick with the smell of dampness and filth. The smell was so nauseating he could barely breathe. And Saffron had lived in this place for 3 years. He felt as if he were being strangled, hot tears streaming down his face. He examined the tiny room, inch by inch. He noticed that the white wall next to the bed was covered in a dense network of scratches, as if they had been gouged out with fingernails. Among them were his name and a few jumbled phrases. "Save me, I don't love you anymore. Let me go." The words were crooked and uneven, but carved deep into the wall. Saffron had waited night after night for someone to save her, and at first that someone must have been him. After all, Ethan was the only family she had left in the world. Deep regret washed over him. He ran his fingers over the scratches and noticed that the ones further down were shallower. The long-term torment had reduced her to an empty shell. He could almost see her sitting on that bed, hopeless and numb. He suddenly remembered the bracelet Saffron had returned to him. She had said, "Uncle Ethan, I wish you happiness." He remembered his own question to her. "Saffron, can't you feel pain? Weren't you always the first to cry and complain that it hurt?" And her calm reply, "Because it doesn't hurt." Of course. Compared to the whips, the suffering she endured at the Institute must have been far more painful. Ethan slapped himself hard across the face twice. But the stinging pain did nothing to alleviate the suffocating grief and remorse in his heart. He owed her all of this. It was all his fault. "Sir, those people are making a lot of noise. What should we do with them?" The question pulled Ethan from his anguish. He turned, his eyes filled with hatred. The smell of burning filled the air, emanating from the surveillance room. Outside, Saffron watched as countless people tried to escape through the windows, only to be dragged back by others. She watched as Ethan emerged, ordered his bodyguards to seal the windows, and tossed a lit torch inside. The fire raged, the blinding flames consuming the surveillance room. The people inside were still pounding on the windows, placing their hope in a portal that had long been nailed shut. Just as Saffron had once placed her hope in an Ethan who would never change his mind. A hope that would never be answered. Chapter 16, Ethan watched the fire, and a thought connected in his mind: the fire at the villa. A deep sense of unease settled over him. He dialed the medical examiner's number. There was no answer. So Ethan set his destination for the villa. As the navigation started, he played a song. The moment the intro began, Saffron knew what it was. It was the lullaby Ethan used to sing to her when she was a child and wouldn't stop crying. He was a terrible singer, always off-key, but his voice was deep and soothing, filled with a sense of security. It was because of the warmth he had given her over the years that she had blurred the lines, losing herself in the fantasy that they could be together forever. The song brought her a moment of peace. She slowly closed her eyes. Just then, Ethan's phone rang. It was Miranda. He answered distractedly. "Hello. Ethan, I found a wonderful burial plot for Saffron. Would you like to come see it with me?" Ethan couldn't bear to hear Saffron's name. He frowned, his voice sharp. "You don't need to worry about that." He hung up and rejected her follow-up call. On the other end, Miranda smiled and turned to the men beside her. Hurry up in front of her, on the floor, was Saffron's body. Several large men were dragging it into a small room. Miranda handed them a stack of cash and waved them away. At that moment, the medical examiner finally called Ethan back. "Mr. Payne, the body has been taken. We were drugged, we didn't see who it was." Panic seized Ethan. "Wait for me, I'm on my way." He slammed the accelerator, honking his horn, wishing he could fly. The rage in his chest made him reckless. He swerved, speeding so fast that other drivers stared in alarm. He practically kicked the door down when he arrived at the morgue. The sight of the empty room made his heart plummet. "Did you find anything?" The surveillance footage was wiped. "We're checking the street cameras now." Ethan slammed his fist against the wall twice, trying to force himself to calm down. The swelling on his face hadn't subsided, and now he was struggling to think straight. But he remembered Miranda. Was her call really just a casual one? Thinking of the fire at the villa, he slowly began to regain his composure. He tried calling Miranda, but her line was busy. He grabbed a bodyguard by the collar, whispered something in his ear, and sent him to investigate the villa fire. Then he made another call. That call gave him the information he needed. He offered a piece of land as a reward, adding more people to the surveillance team. After 3 minutes of waiting, he finally had Saffron's location. The moment he heard she'd been found, he raced to his car and sped off. The medical examiner looked down at his half-finished report and sighed. He had never seen a girl with so many scars who had died in such a horrific way. For a life like that, perhaps death was a release. Meanwhile, Ethan, now on the road, saw the address on his GPS. To his surprise, it was a temple. Chapter 17, when Ethan arrived at the temple, the first thing he saw was Miranda, kneeling in the center of the main hall, chanting scriptures. "What are you doing here?" He was instantly certain that Saffron's body had something to do with her, and his tone turned hostile. "Where is Saffron?" Miranda didn't answer immediately, continuing her chanting. Losing his patience, Ethan grabbed her by the arm and pulled her to her feet. Only then did she stop, looking him over, her words dripping with sarcasm. "Ethan Payne, in your heart, is Saffron really just a child to you? All I did was take her away from you for a little while, and you're so tense you're bruising my arm." Her words left him speechless. He looked down at his hand, which was indeed gripping her arm with bruising force. "See? Ethan Payne, you're even more disgusting than I thought. I was just a shield from the very beginning. The one you've always loved is Saffron. She's 10 years younger than you. Ethan, you are the very beast you claim not to be." Hearing her words, the dark cloud that had been hanging over him seemed to lift slightly. He had always thought he just couldn't lose Saffron, but Miranda's words tore away the pretense he had maintained for so long. "Do you remember how we met, Ethan? It was at a banquet. You said my dress was beautiful. I thought it was just a line to start a conversation. But I bet there's an identical dress hanging in Saffron's closet right now, isn't there? And many more, so many that it makes me jealous. You probably don't even notice the way you look at her. Every time you look at Saffron, it disgusts me. But Ethan, the person you were supposed to marry was me." Miranda's voice broke as she spoke, desperate for a real answer. "Why could you let them take her skin for me? Why could you ignore her being violated by those vagrants? But now you won't marry me?" "I didn't do anything wrong." The woman before him was a mess of tears, looking pitiful and helpless, but Ethan was unmoved. He tightened his grip on her arm and threw her away from him. "Yes, I am a beast, so where is Saffron? If anything has happened to her, I will not let you go." Seeing him admit it, a flash of malice crossed Miranda's eyes. She suppressed her own pain and glanced toward the abbot nearby. "Patron, if the chanting is interrupted, it must be restarted, or the prayer will not be answered." The abbot then walked over to Ethan. "This female patron has left something in my care. You may come with me." Ethan practically dragged the abbot away, not sparing Miranda a single glance. And Miranda, surprisingly, began chanting again in earnest, her face pale, her lips trembling. At that moment, Saffron's spirit floated over and blew a breath of cold air in Miranda's ear. The chill made Miranda even more frightened. "I'm chanting for you already. Stop haunting my dreams. This is a prayer for rebirth. It will definitely work for you. Please just leave me alone." Saffron's spirit, as if not hearing her, continued to blow cold air on her, watching as Miranda kowtowed in fear. Meanwhile, Ethan, finally seeing Saffron's body, let out a sigh of relief. He was about to pull the body out. But as he touched the bamboo mat, the abbot slapped his hand away. "She cannot be reborn, and it is all because of you." The words nailed Ethan to the spot. Chapter 18. When the female patron brought the body here, she wanted me to help her soul find peace. "It is because of your lingering obsession, patron, that she is forced to wander this world." The abbot's words struck Ethan to the core. He seized on their meaning. "You mean Saffron is still alive? She is indeed dead, but a trace of her spirit remains. The female patron was chanting a prayer for rebirth, but you interrupted it." As soon as the abbot finished, Ethan was filled with regret. He softened, thinking that Miranda had been wholeheartedly praying for Saffron. It seemed he owed her an apology, but right now he clung to a sliver of hope, desperate for an answer from the abbot. "So, master, can you bring Saffron back?" The abbot was startled and immediately shook his head. "That is impossible." Ethan's heart sank. Of course, that's how it was. His eyes dimmed, and he looked down at Saffron's body with a bitter smile. "So I can really never see Near again, can I?" The abbot didn't speak, but instead handed Ethan a thin booklet and walked away. Looking at the title, Prayer for Rebirth, Ethan hesitated. He didn't want Saffron to disappear completely. But when he opened it, he found a note on an inner page. "The ritual of manifestation is the first step of the prayer for rebirth. There is a small chance it can allow the soul to manifest and communicate." Ethan read the words over and over in disbelief, ecstatic. He clutched the booklet and ran after the abbot, who was sweeping leaves near the gate. Patron, countless people have tried this method. The failure rate is very high. Do you know why? I don't know, but I must try. Ethan's voice was filled with unwavering determination. If she must endure the pain of immolation, and you must experience all the suffering she has endured, are you still willing? Floating nearby, Saffron heard the abbot's question. She watched as Ethan gripped the abbot's hand and said with utmost seriousness, "I am willing. I only wish to see Saffron one more time." A single tear rolled down his cheek. Her uncle had cried more in the days since her death than she had ever seen before. But what was the point? Even if they met again, what would it change? To Saffron, this obsession was pointless. She didn't even want to see him. But the pain of immolation, can it be postponed? There are some things I need to confirm. There was a cold edge to Ethan's voice now. I can only say the sooner the better. The longer the soul is separated from the body, the harder it will be for her to find peace. The abbot hesitated, then added, "And it is best not to take her away from here." He then returned to his sweeping. Ethan made a bold decision on the spot. He called the medical examiner to the temple. He wanted to witness the autopsy himself, but the room was too small. He decided to find a more spacious, well-ventilated area to wait for the examiner. While searching, he saw Miranda, still chanting the prayer for rebirth. "Stop, Miranda. I don't want Saffron to find peace right now." But Miranda seemed possessed, her eyes shut tight, her lips moving rapidly, beads of sweat on her forehead. Ethan leaned closer and heard what she was actually muttering. "Don't come for me, don't come for me." "Miranda," he clapped her on the shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with terror, trembling. She gasped, looking as if she had just seen a ghost. Ethan found her behavior strange. "Did you take the body away?" Ethan shook his head, confused. Miranda let out a sigh of relief. "Good, that's good. You only brought Saffron here for her rebirth, right? Why didn't you tell me?" Miranda finally composed herself, forcing down her fear. "It wouldn't have mattered if I told you. You wouldn't have agreed, would you?" It was true. If it was for her rebirth, Ethan would have refused. "Regardless, thank you." Ethan said it with genuine sincerity. The words made Miranda's jaw drop. She was stunned, but quickly recovered, a bitter taste in her mouth. She forced a smile. "Don't mention it." "It's not over yet, Ethan Payne. It's too early for you to be thanking me." Meanwhile, beside the body, several men were piling dry straw in a circle around Saffron. The abbot stood nearby, sighing as he closed the door. He clutched his prayer beads, his chanting growing more frantic, his unease palpable. It was the unease of a guilty man. Chapter 19, Ethan received a call from the medical examiner and was about to lead him to the small room where Saffron's body was kept. But Miranda blocked his path. "Ethan Payne, I have something to say to you." Suspecting nothing, Ethan turned to the examiners. "You all go ahead." "No," Miranda shouted, cutting him off. "If she undergoes an autopsy, she won't be able to find peace. Are you still going to do this, Ethan Payne?" Ethan felt that something was not right. It seemed Miranda was deliberately trying to mislead him. "The abbot told you quite a lot." As he said this, he saw Miranda's expression change. His suspicion grew, and he pushed her aside and started running. The examiners, confused, ran after him. As he rounded the corner, Ethan saw flames licking out of the small room. Thick smoke billowed from the window, and he came face to face with the abbot. "Get out of my way," enraged, Ethan shoved the abbot aside and kicked open the door. Inside, men were fanning the flames, one holding a lighter. Ethan kicked him to the ground, sending the man and the lighter flying. On the floor, the sheet covering Saffron was already burning, the flames growing larger, about to scorch her skin. Ethan pulled her from the fire. The flames licked at his hands, but he gritted his teeth and carried her out of the room, only noticing his own injuries after laying her down. In that brief moment, the fire had seared through a layer of his skin. His hand was a mess of blisters, sizzling and emitting a burnt smell. Ah, the delayed pain made him cry out. Fortunately, one of the examiners quickly scooped some water from a small man-made pond and splashed it on his hand. The cool water extinguished the flames, and the pain subsided slightly. But he ignored his hand and knelt beside Saffron. "Nia, are you hurt?" But Saffron was just a body. She couldn't answer him. He examined her carefully, his heart filled with regret and self-loathing. "It was me again, it was me again. I'm sorry." Floating nearby, Saffron looked at Ethan's burnt hand and sighed. A light breeze stirred. The abbot looked up sharply in Saffron's direction. He murmured to himself, "It truly is." Ethan, filled with fury, looked up at the abbot, his voice icy. "Abbot, what is going on here?" The abbot, trembling, closed his eyes and explained. The more Ethan heard, the darker his face became. That female patron investigated the background of everyone in this temple. We who live here do not fear death, but our families are innocent. Although this was a lie, the outcome is not entirely bad. Immolation is essentially cremation. The body cannot be preserved forever. After saying this, the abbot glanced again in Saffron's direction and added, "And the prayer for rebirth was not a lie." Miranda, Ethan exploded, his brow furrowed in rage. The name came from his lips laced with pure hatred. Just then, his phone rang. "Sir, the fire at the villa, it was Miss Vance." Chapter 20, Ethan left his bodyguards with the medical examiner to protect the body and raced into the main hall. Miranda had just packed her things and was about to get into her car. Seeing Ethan storming towards her, radiating fury, she realized what had happened. Panicked, she yanked open the car door, but just as she was about to get in and shut it, Ethan grabbed it. She used all her strength to close the door, but was no match for him. She could only watch as he pulled the door open, dragged her out, and threw her to the ground. "Miranda, what did Nia ever do to you that you had to frame her? And now you won't even leave her body alone. How can you be so cruel?" His words made Miranda's face turn white, but she scrambled to her feet, defiant. "I hate her. Why should I have to be magnanimous while you two flirt in front of me?" She deserved to die. Smack. Ethan slapped her across the face. "You're the one who deserves to die." He slapped her again, so hard that her face swelled up and her hair was knocked loose, clinging to her cheek. But her eyes still burned with fire. She gritted her teeth and sneered, "This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, I would never have met Saffron, and I wouldn't be haunted by nightmares every night for what I've done. Didn't all of this happen right under your nose? You allowed it, didn't you? What's the point of hitting me now? Ethan Payne, you're the one who killed Saffron. She should be haunting you. She should be dragging you down to hell with her." Ethan was speechless with rage, his chest heaving. He grabbed her by the collar and hissed, "You will pay for every one of your crimes." He shoved her into the car, locked the doors, and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Seeing the almost insane speed of the car, Miranda started to panic. She pounded on the window, all her usual arrogance gone. She was like a shrew, her hair a mess, her face swollen, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Ethan Payne, let me out, do you hear me?" But Ethan ignored her, only driving faster. He was an excellent driver. Even at this speed, which eventually silenced Miranda and left her pale and clutching the door, he expertly weaved through traffic. For a moment, Ethan thought about ending his own life. Miranda was right. The Institute, Miranda herself, the harm they had inflicted on Saffron had all been done with his tacit approval. His irresponsibility had led to this tragedy. He was the one who deserved to die most, but as he slammed on the brakes, he calmed down. He didn't want to die, not yet. He hadn't finished his investigation. Miranda hadn't paid the price, and he still wanted to see Saffron one more time, even if it was unlikely to succeed, and even if he was the last person Saffron wanted to see. Chapter 21, Miranda's face was ashen. The moment the car stopped, she scrambled out and began to vomit. The contents of her stomach churned out, the sourness bringing with it a wave of deep humiliation. She had never been so disgraced in her life. Miranda wiped her mouth with her sleeve, the rage inside her making her want to tear the man before her to shreds. "Ethan Payne, what the hell do you want? You think I'm afraid of you? If you dare to touch me, you're finished. Most of your companies are tied to my family. If I die, you're finished too. Ethan Payne, let me go now." With her last words, the proud heiress of the Vance family seemed to return. Her posture was haughty, her eyes refusing to meet his, filled with disdain. "Miranda, you're not the only daughter in the Vance family." Ethan smiled and walked closer. "You think there isn't a deal between us? You're just a pawn your family handed over to me. From the moment that contract was signed, your life has belonged to me." His words, spoken slowly, made Miranda's straight back falter. She looked at him, a chill running through her. She stared into his eyes in disbelief and screamed, "Ethan Payne, if I die, you'll have a hard time explaining it to my family. We're not even married." Ethan continued to advance, step by step. "So what? Saffron was my only family, my only attachment in this world for all these years. Because of you, I thought she hadn't changed. Because of you, I ignored the damage that goddamn Institute did to her. He remembered the horrifying scars on Saffron's back, old and new wounds crisscrossing her skin, a permanent record of her torture. Her body had no smooth patches left, every inch spoke of her suffering. As he recalled it, his voice trembled with pain. And because of you, she had her skin grafted. How excruciating must that have been, the scalpel slicing into her skin. He remembered clearly. Saffron hadn't said a word, hadn't begged or cried, hadn't even looked at him. The thought was like a knife twisting in his heart. And in the end, he couldn't go on. I was really wrong, please. Don't leave me here, Uncle Ethan, save me. I can't be alone with these men. I'll go insane. I really will, her agonized screams, all instigated by Miranda. And even then, he hadn't turned back. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Seeing her chance, Miranda turned and ran. Ethan watched her go but didn't pursue. Because here, there was only one way out, death. Once, Saffron had been this lively and lovely. She would run ahead, then turn back to find him, calling out, "Uncle, uncle, hurry up." When she felt wronged, she would clutch his sleeve and cry so hard the whole world seemed to shake, drawing the stares of every passerby. But Saffron had never felt ashamed. Ethan knew that he, just like now, had been the one to back Saffron into a corner, step by step. It was time for it to end. Chapter 22, Miranda had nowhere left to run. She couldn't believe Ethan had chosen a place like this. A completely isolated, dilapidated, abandoned village. She was cornered, with walls on 3 sides and the only nearby house boarded up. There was no one else around, and the road here had been rough and bumpy. The houses looked like they were slated for demolition, with crumbling walls and a thick layer of dust everywhere. Ethan, unaffected by the dust, watched as Miranda cowered in the corner. He calmly pulled a meter-long broomstick from a nearby pile of rubble. He held it and approached her slowly, his eyes strangely fond as he looked at the broomstick. "This is the place I first brought Saffron to, where she stayed for just one day. Like you, she couldn't stand the dust. She begged me to take her away, said she was afraid of the dogs here, so I left with her. But now, I want to leave you here." He put his thumb and forefinger to his lips and let out a sharp whistle. A few emaciated dogs, their ribs showing, came running at the sound. They looked at Miranda as if she were food. "Ethan Payne, are you insane?" It's not what I think, right? You wouldn't be so cruel." Miranda was so terrified she could barely move, trying to shrink into herself. She didn't dare look at the dogs, her voice trembling. "I was never a good person." With that, Ethan swung the broomstick viciously, bringing it down on Miranda. Each blow made her scream. He used the handle end, and with his strength, he was relentless. He struck her again and again, without pause. He repeatedly hit the same spot, bruising her leg until it was a mess of red welts. Miranda, a pampered heiress with delicate skin, was soon sobbing uncontrollably. She cried out, unable to shield herself. She was in so much pain she could barely breathe, her cries turning into choked sobs. I was wrong, stop hitting me," but Ethan didn't stop until she had lost all her strength and could no longer speak. Saffron saw it all. She knew Ethan was no saint. He wouldn't have amassed the power and status he had otherwise. He wouldn't have whipped her over 50 times without a second thought, or so easily burned all those people at the Institute alive. This was the capital he had built his empire on. But looking at Miranda, Saffron felt a pang of pity. The next second, however, another whistle blew. The dogs lunged forward, and the sounds of tearing flesh and screams mixed together. Saffron couldn't watch anymore. Ethan had truly gone mad. He tossed the broomstick aside, his eyes vacant. He leaned against the wall, walking slowly, each step as if weighted with lead. Just moments ago, he had been so powerful, yet now his face was pale and drawn. Saffron then noticed his burnt hand. The back of it was a raw, bloody mess. A red streak marked the gray wall where he had leaned on it. "Uncle, what if someone bullies me? Then you hit them back. But I don't know how to fight. Then you bite them like a hunting dog. No matter what happens, you never let yourself be wronged. Our Nia will never be wronged." Saffron watched Ethan, who was now leaning against the wall, gasping for breath, and remembered the words he had once told her. For some reason, she suddenly felt sad. Rain began to fall from the sky, drop by drop. Ethan looked up at the sky and suddenly laughed. "Nia, I miss you." But Saffron, floating nearby, didn't look at him. She just wanted it to be over. She didn't want to remember anymore. Chapter 23, the rain grew heavier, washing the blood from Ethan's hand. It also soaked him to the bone. He glanced back at Miranda. Except for her face, her body was a bloody, mangled mess, the wounds horrifying to look at. The blood on the ground had spread to his feet. He turned and walked away decisively, getting into his car. The sudden change in temperature from the storm outside to the car's interior made him feel sick. An unnatural flush colored his cheeks. But he started the car and sped toward the temple. In the car, he played Saffron's favorite lullaby again. When he arrived at the temple, he found the abbot. The autopsy was complete. The medical examiner handed him the file detailing the cause of every wound. Ethan took the file and read through it, one by one. All the scars he could never bring himself to fully examine were listed there. Electric shocks, dragging, violation, whip marks, the damage from the skin graft, bruises from beatings, there were so many. "Do you still want to see her?" The abbot, even without looking at the file, could tell from the number of pages how horrific it was. This wasn't just a file, it was a record of a poor girl's years of suffering. "My life should have been hers anyway." With a bitter smile, Ethan had his men begin preparing the necessary instruments. He locked himself in the small room with the file, opened an old laptop, and began to match each injury to the video footage. Ethan didn't want anyone else to see these videos, so he did it himself, one by one. Saffron's face was often obscured in the videos, but the sounds alone were enough to make one's skin crawl. These beasts, he saw them denying her food, her outstretched hand as thin as a withered branch. He saw them laughing as they dragged her across the floor. He saw her go from screaming and crying at the beginning to, later, barely reacting to any form of torture. He even saw her in that small room with a dozen men being treated like an animal. It was filthy, disgusting, and more than that, it was the slow, torturous agony of 1,000 cuts. Ethan felt Saffron's despair so acutely that his chest felt crushed, unable to breathe. He dug his nails into his palms until they bled. He hated himself. Right now, the person he hated most was himself. It wasn't until evening that everything was ready. The electroshock device, the starvation, the dragging, the whipping, all of that was easy to arrange. Only the violation was something no one dared to bring up. And even with just these, no one knew how long a normal person could last. "Mr. Payne, shouldn't we treat the wound on your hand first?" "No need." Ethan sat down in the electroshock chair. His face was already flushed with fever. "Sir, are you sure about this? You have a fever. Do it." His voice was firm. Floating nearby, Saffron watched him silently, moving to float directly in front of him. She looked at him with cold indifference. She wanted to see if there was anything else to see on his face. Saffron froze. At this close distance, she could have sworn his eyes were looking right at her. In the pouring rain, Ethan said, "I'm sorry. Uncle didn't protect you." Saffron's eyes flickered slightly, and she turned away. The rain fell harder and harder. Chapter 24, the moment the button was pressed, a muffled groan escaped through Ethan's gritted teeth. The veins in his arms bulged, and a cold sweat broke out on his brow. His teeth chattered uncontrollably. As the voltage increased, the machine itself began to shake violently. The power was terrifyingly high. "Sir, we can't do this," but Ethan, his head thrown back, just said, "Continue. If no one presses the button, you won't get paid." At his words, everyone exchanged uneasy glances. The bodyguards showed little hesitation, but Ethan's close friends, who had been with him for years, couldn't bear it. "Sir, Miss Saffron may have suffered, but if she had just told you about these things earlier, this tragedy might have been avoided." "That's right, this isn't all your fault," his friends chimed in, trying to reason with him. But Ethan cut them off. "If it weren't for me, she wouldn't have suffered. In that situation, how could she have said anything? It's all my fault. Don't you dare say another bad word about Saffron," he roared his rebuttal, then turned to the bodyguard beside him. "Continue," the bodyguard, paid to do a job, showed no emotion and pushed the power to its maximum. "Arg," Ethan screamed, a raw, agonized sound. His entire body felt as if it had been beaten with whips, the pain so deep it seemed to reach his bones. Just that one shock left him weak and drained. He gasped for breath, his head bowed in the rain, not moving for a long time. "Sir, how are you?" His friends rushed to his side. but Ethan only repeated one word. Saffron. The abbot quickly began to chant the prayer for rebirth, trying to seize the moment to awaken Saffron's spirit. But Saffron remained unmoved, just watching. This pain was nothing. To her, physical pain eventually faded. Even the skin graft, under the soothing effect of ointment, had moments of relief. But humiliation did not. Contempt did not. The abbot was sweating with anxiety, terrified that something would happen to Ethan here. After all, his friends did not look like kind men. If something went wrong, it would be the end of their temple and their families. Sensing the abbot's tension, Ethan managed a weak smile. They won't do anything to the temple. Make sure of it, he said, turning to the friend closest to him. The man looked to be about Ethan's age. He lowered his head and nodded, but he couldn't look Ethan in the eye. I told you not to bring her back, but you insisted. For all these years, if it wasn't for her, you wouldn't have worked yourself to the bone, and you wouldn't be torturing yourself like this now. Isn't it enough? The empire we've worked so hard to build, are you just going to throw it all away? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked around at his friends. I'm an orphan too. I know how much she suffered. She was my only family in this world. That empire, it's not just mine. It belongs to all of you, so it's not a waste. His friends fell silent, stepping back. The bodyguards grabbed Ethan by the ankles and dragged him across the damp temple ground. The rough surface scraped his face, which was usually so proud and handsome, now a mess of horrifying scratches. Blood streamed down his face as Saffron watched from the side. Chapter 25 next was the whipping. As the lash struck Ethan's back, bloody welts appeared, stark against the rain-soaked white of his shirt. Blood dripped to the ground. The rain fell harder. Watching the whip fall again and again, seeing the bloody marks, Saffron felt a flicker of something. She began to pace back and forth, agitated. The abbot sensed the change and had someone bring over a censer. He lit several thick, short incense sticks. As the incense burned, a thick smoke billowed out, only to be extinguished by the rain. Flustered, the abbot replaced the incense, this time shielding it with an umbrella as he relit it. The moment the flame caught, the smoke spread, its scent reaching Saffron's spirit. It was colorless and odorless, but it made her feel drowsy. Then came the incessant chanting. The abbot pushed the prayer beads through his fingers, his lips moving, reciting the prayer for rebirth. By now, Ethan, weakened by fever and the torture, was barely conscious. As the smoke grew thicker, Saffron closed her eyes. She felt a powerful force pulling her. When she opened her eyes, she saw Ethan, his face filled with ecstatic joy. Saffron, Saffron, can you see me? He cried out happily, but Saffron ignored him, looking down at his feet instead. Ethan looked down and realized he was floating too. Saffron, I'm sorry, I'll be with you soon, okay? She still didn't speak, just turning her head away. Ethan grew anxious, his voice softening. Saffron, Saffron, please look at me. It's been so long since I've seen you. I miss you. The last 3 words were choked with sobs. Saffron finally turned to face him, her voice cold. Don't come looking for me. I don't want to see you. With that, she turned to break free from the smoke's pull, but Ethan grabbed her arm. No, the abbot shouted, swinging his arms through the air. Do not touch, let go. If he hadn't been facing the opposite direction, Saffron would have thought he could see them. Ethan let go, but tears welled in his eyes. Saffron, I didn't protect you. I let you suffer so much. But Saffron cut him off with disgust. Ethan Payne, I wish for you a life of endless sickness and pain, a life where you can neither live nor die. Ethan was stunned by her words. He was about to speak when a powerful force yanked him back. He watched as Saffron drifted further and further away until she dissipated into the air. Pain and despair filled Ethan's face. His brow was furrowed, and tears flowed uncontrollably from his eyes, dripping onto the ground. He wiped at them futilely, they just kept coming. His legs gave out, and he could barely support himself. He wanted to chase after her, to grab her hand and tell her how much he loved her, how he couldn't live without her. But his feet were like lead, too heavy to move. A guttural scream of pain tore from his throat, a sound from the depths of his soul, filled with endless sorrow and regret. He collapsed, clutching his head, his body shaking like a helpless child. Why? Why, he asked himself over and over but found no answer. He knew it was all irreversible. He had lost her forever. It is done. The prayer has worked. You have seen her. Let it end now. His friends let out a collective sigh of relief and helped him to his feet. But Ethan was dazed, staring at the spot where Saffron had disappeared, silent for a long time. The rain began to subside, and then he suddenly went limp and collapsed. A chorus of shouts, a call to emergency services. In just 1 month, the renowned Ethan Payne vanished from public life. His business empire crumbled. He lay in a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV drip. After being saved that day, he was left bedridden. He was partially paralyzed, his face contorted, and he had lost the ability to care for himself. His hands shook so badly he often couldn't get food to his mouth, spilling it all over the bed. He had aged into a fragile old man overnight, his face covered in scars, some of which he had inflicted on himself with a fruit knife during moments of delirium. Most of the time, he was like a fool, repeating only one name: Saffron. At the end of the month, the money for his hospital stay ran out. No one came to pay. Ethan was thrown out. He spent his days eating dirt or whatever he could find in the trash. He was skeletal, and the stench that clung to him was unbearable. If he got too close to anyone, he would be beat. In the cold of winter, Ethan finally succumbed to his illnesses and died. No one came to claim his withered remains. He was unceremoniously buried in an unmarked grave. When spring came, stray dogs, following the scent, dug him up and devoured what was left of his bones.